In this video, we're going to look at the role of the tongue as being the primary sensory organ that determines your sense of taste. So contained within the tongue are special nerve cells that are what we call sensory neurons, whose job is to recognize specific chemicals that come in contact with the tongue, and depending on what these chemicals are that trigger specific sensory neurons within the tongue, these are going to correspond to specific flavors in the food that you eat. For example, anytime that you consume food that has acid within its composition, you would perceive this, or rather your tongue would perceive this, as being a sour taste. Naturally, whenever you consume anything with a lot of sugar, different sensory neurons within the tongue, specifically in the tip of your tongue, will recognize this as being a sweet flavor. Now, the flavor that most people have the greatest difficulty in dealing with is anything with a bitter flavor, and bitterness is actually your tongue recognizing the presence of certain compounds that act the opposite way that acids do, that actually act as bases. And one of the reasons why a bitter taste is probably the hardest taste to cope with is that many organic bases are actually very, very deadly poisons, and so the bitter taste actually evolved as a defense mechanism in the event where early humans ate something that was potentially poisonous. Their bitter taste buds would recognize it and then spit it out of their mouth, thereby preventing a potential poisoning attempt. Now, once again, just because you prefer bitter food doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with your taste system. It simply means that your body has a greater degree of tolerance towards organic bases than perhaps other humans do. Not surprisingly, salty taste is triggered by sensory neurons in the tongue that likely recognize NaCl, and most likely it's recognition of the Na plus ion in NaCl that gives off the salty taste. And finally, the taste bud that most people don't even know the name of are taste buds that recognize what's called a savory taste, which is actually how the tongue responds to food that is rich in protein. So a lot of people describe meat or cheese or other examples of protein-rich food as having a distinct taste that is neither sweet, bitter, sour, salty, or anything else like that, because their tongues have the ability to respond to protein that gets onto the tongue. And in fact, rather than referring to it as savory taste, a lot of people use the original Japanese term that was coined for this, which is pronounced umami, which is just the Japanese word for savory. Now, it's also believed that fats have a special taste receptor that is on the tongue that allows people to identify the distinct taste of oil or butter or similar foods like that, but as such, the structure within the tongue has not yet been identified. Now, aside from obviously being responsible for our perception of taste and our genuine enjoyment of food, all of the taste receptors, again informally called your taste buds, are actually ways of recognizing what type of food you are putting inside of you, and as mentioned for bitter food, many of these can act as defense mechanisms to prevent you from ingesting foods that are overly harmful. Another example would be preventing you from ingesting overly sour food, because the more sour the food is that you're eating, the more acid is present, and the more danger that acid is going to pose to your enzymes within your body, and therefore this is why many people have an intense aversion to very, very sour food, although once again, many people do enjoy it as well. And even for more quote-unquote regular taste buds like sweet and salty receptors. Obviously, it's important for the body to maintain a balanced level of consumption of sugar and of salt. Ingesting too much of both can cause problems with blood pressure or complications involving other diseases such as diabetes, and so your taste buds function as a way for your body to maintain a delicate balancing act of ingesting the right amount of the right type of foods. This concludes our two-part series covering the role of the mouth. So before you move on to the next video that focuses on the esophagus and the stomach, you can take a look at the case study below that works through a detailed dentition analysis of a few species of dinosaurs, and you can see whether your knowledge of the role of teeth in mechanical digestion can allow you to identify what the diet of the dinosaurs were. And once you've completed this case study, you can take a look at the practice problems below before moving on to the videos regarding the esophagus and the stomach.